This is behind the scenes of the Faroe Island video I just put up on the channel, and I shot it with this, the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 6K Pro. Before I jump into like explaining the process and everything, I just want to show the video. If you've already seen it, you can just skip ahead, but here it is.
Sol og frost, sandur og hav. Stóra sandstrendur alltid oververelige. Ungen har skriva I sanden. Et einsemmes åtrått dansegolv utanför tog. Her stand jeg, men den ljóskvittna, innkostna marstia. Offer tundur. I måten til heimsens byrja og enda. Skal jeg tia til at tala. Komma til mun, til år, alt og ikke. Så lydet du en vest, så vest du då. Du gå mittlen, stendur I min I ötlen. Enn en stokket av stund. Her stendur du, I ljose og vindi, enn det tulja av vare, frammanfyrir Storhausens asjå. Det matbygla og avgjå, eikaløse. Her stendur du ofærum og tundur, av måtunum til byrjan og enda. Høyrer du hjertans, tusarindar, solmale, tar vi alltid sann. Storfinnkje I løyve, gamla kjenta skurpunktet mellom fortøy og framtøy, som du stendur mitt I, utan livande eie, I sånne ometallige, men reande gåva.
Alright, I hope you enjoyed that. First, let's jump into planning of the video. Let me just quickly say that the video and this trip was done in partnership with Blackmagic, which means that of course you should view this video with the appropriate skepticism in regards to what I say about the camera. But I will be honest, this is something I really wish I was better at, because I continually underestimate how important it is, and I want to stress how important it is, but we didn't have much time to do this project. I was trying to pull it all together in a very short frame of time. Also, because the nature of this video, you can get away with not planning as much. Usually when I do this kind of videos where I travel somewhere, I like to look at the local literature to see if I can draw any inspiration from there. In this case, I looked at Faroese literature and I came across an author named William Heinesen. He's one of the more famous Faroese writers. I came across a poem called "It Is Yet One of Those Oceanic Days." Some of the things he describes in this poem, I knew I wanted to shoot something that aligned with this. And I did that because I was pretty sure I wanted someone to do this poem as a voiceover when I was done shooting all of this. And I was right. So second thing in the planning that's really important is the location scouting. Because especially since I was basing most of this on like the mood and atmosphere and stuff like that, locations were pretty important. And luckily I was traveling with a friend, Daniel, who is also, by the way, a really talented cinematographer. He's also really good at location scouting. He's complimenting me in the areas where I'm obviously lacking. He's just better at researching it than I am. Beforehand and while we were there the first day, he was looking at places we could go and then writing it down. We then kind of sketched out a rough plan of where we wanted to go. So I'm almost embarrassed to say that as far as planning goes, that was basically it. And again, I think you can get away with that because this type of film we did, it's not depending on a strong narrative structure because we are in a beautiful landscape. But I think it's still important to have some kind of narrative in it, or else I think it has the potential to end up looking like B-roll with no really thought behind it. All right, on to the shooting part of the film. first 4 days we spent in a Airbnb in a small city called Blackmagic. All the week we had there, we already knew, and it was perhaps part of the planning phase, I forgot to mention, is that we kind of knew the weather looked kind of shitty when we got there. We already checked it beforehand. We could see that it wouldn't be like sunny. Well, it's never really sunny at the Faroe Islands. At least that's what I'm told. But we already knew that this wasn't going to be like a sunrise, sunset chasing trip, because the weather just didn't look to be something that would suit this kind of like shooting. So instead what we did was to pretty quickly realize that wasn't going to happen, and instead focus on like the blue hour sunset mood, especially like the blue hour part, because we both really like how the atmosphere and the whole like mood that this creates. That way we created like a consistent look in the footage we got, because it's all like kind of the same mood, vibe, or whatever you want to call it. But the first 4 days here we just kind of spent going out to the locations we picked and then see how it looked, and then just go from there. We really didn't have too much of a specific plan there. The last remaining 2 days was spending something called, and I'm probably gonna butcher this like entirely, but Gasatalua, and that's like 5 minutes away from, just hold on, let me read this aloud, Mulafosua, which is probably one of the most photographed waterfalls in the Faroe Islands at all. So you've probably seen this before, at least on Instagram. It's a really pretty place. We kind of learned by now that by allowing ourselves to just kind of get lost and see whatever piques our interest in the area, or whatever it is like kind of just stands out, usually that ends up being some of the best scenes in films like this. To give a perfect example of this, when we went to get the ferry to go to Kalsoy, which is one of the small islands, and on that ferry we just like the whole mood there, and just being out on the sea and going past some of the mountains and everything, is we found a lot of like inspiration on being on that ferry. It ended up being some of the first few scenes in the film, and that's just an example of that. We didn't have the ferry as a location, we had Kalsoy as a location, but the ferry ended up being almost more interesting than the island itself. On Kalsoy itself, we had a really rough time, because we wanted to go to a mountain where we could see another mountain, and we wanted to shoot that. First of all, the trip up there was insanely slippery. Daniel slipped and actually hit himself pretty badly on the elbow, and it was bleeding. And then when we came up there, it was so windy. It's just hard to describe. And it was so windy that when I tried to shoot the mountain, I couldn't hold the camera perfectly still. I only ended up using like very little of that footage, because it was the only footage I was able to stabilize that looked somewhat decent. It ended up in the film, as you can see, but really had to fight to get that. So most of the shooting days went something along that we started going out around, I don't know, 2, 3, 4, something like that. And then we just stayed out till 11 in the evening, 11:30. We would then instead just spend like the first part of the day just looking over material, relaxing, having a good time, cooking food, stuff like that. And then we spent like all evening shooting. And that was a pretty consistent schedule for the whole trip actually. Okay, so next topic I want to touch on is how it was to work with the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 6K Pro. So I actually do already own the 6K, and before that I owned the 4K. So I'm quite familiar with Blackmagic products. So what's the main difference working with the 6K Pro instead of the 6K? Well, as most of you know, the sensor is identical, but the feature I love the most about this, and something I used all the time, is the built-in ND filters. I hate, with a passion, screwing variable ND filters on and off all the time when I shoot, and just being able to push these 2 buttons and then get the same effect, it just makes it so much easier to go out and shoot. Secondly, I really enjoyed the articulating screen and the brightness of the screen. It kind of makes like an external monitor obsolete. Not completely, but working on projects like this, where most of the time it's just run and gun, this is so incredibly helpful, because I don't need an external monitor, and the whole setup just becomes lighter. And even doing like broad daylight and everything, I can see what I'm doing on the screen. The battery grip, which is something I also really enjoy, it gives it quite a bit of battery time, and it makes it heavier, which makes it easier to film by hand without too much shaking. This lens was on 95% of the time. It's a 16 to 35 Canon f4, no, not the f2.8, just the f4. It's stabilized, which is quite important because there's no stabilization in the Blackmagic, and when you shoot handheld, there's a lot of like micro jitter if you don't have any stabilization at all. What you're looking at here is my whole setup for shooting the movie. This is what makes Blackmagic special, is that the combination of price and quality is pretty much unmatched. You have to pay so much more to get anything that's similar in quality or better in quality. The cost goes up exponentially. It's just not a little bit, it's a whole lot. So to me, it's pretty incredible that we can get tools like this and create stuff that looks professional. I'm not saying my stuff looks professional, but I've seen stuff that looks really professional created with these cameras for the price that it costs. To me, it's pretty crazy. One thing I would like to see improved in these cameras though is the focus peaking. I actually think it was quite hard for me to sometimes gauge where my focus was at. And in some shots I actually missed it because I couldn't quite see where I was focusing. All right, that was everything from this behind the scenes of my Faroe Island film. It was really fun to make this project. Big thanks to Daniel for helping me out. Filming, location scouting, everything. Really, he's a good guy. Really enjoyed his company on the trip as well. And a big thanks to, of course, Blackmagic Designs for actually supporting this whole trip. I was the one who pitched the idea and they were just like, yeah, let's do it. And I think that's pretty awesome. So just let me know if you have any questions and comments. I will happily answer them. But that was all for now. Until the next time, take care.
Hende det der var i fokus.